we have short case scenarios. Each one will have about 3 to 4 questions, and that's the OSCE type. And we'll also have one MCQ. You have to identify the right answer with the explanation and identify the wrong ones also with the explanation. So it is not going to be just simply identifying what is right. You have to also tell us why the other options are wrong. So for the first scenario, may I request Dr. Ravi Kiran to please join us. Professor Rajesh, I hope you are with us.
Yeah, I am there.
And Dr. Jayanti and Dr. Varghese Thomas. Ravi, are you here? Ravi, are you here? Ravi Kiran?
You are there initially.
Is Ravi Kiran here? If not, we'll go to Samir.
Samir,
Is Samir here?
Yes, sir.
Okay,
Good
Samir,
evening.
you please
Good evening,
unmute
sir.
yourself. And
Okay, sir.
who's joined me?
Samir, sir.
Samir, okay.
Yes.
Okay, now. So you have to discuss the first case scenario. You can read. You can start reading.
A 48-year-old man who has consumed 90 grams of alcohol and 20 cigarettes daily over the past 30 years is referred to you because of continuous epigastric pain radiating to the back for 6 months. The pain is very severe at times, needing injections. He also has postprandial fullness, but no nausea or vomiting.
Okay. So now this is the history that you have from a patient who's come. What more information do you want?
Sir, I would like to find out if patient has history of any admission prior to this for pancreatitis, and whether now associated with postprandial fullness, he is having any weight loss, loss of appetite.
He has a loss of appetite. He has not been admitted earlier, but how will you proceed to find out whether a previous admission was because of pancreatitis or something else? You said previous admission for pancreatitis.
Yes, sir.
If
that time the patient had pain which was radiated to the back and was relieved with analgesics or stooping forwards, and any history of abdominal distension for which he was kept nil per oral and was treated with IV fluids.
Okay.
And he was told to avoid alcohol because that was the inciting agent for his condition.
So there's no history of previous admission. What else do you want to know?
Whether patient has any history of chronic diarrhea, and whether he's a diabetic, and
would you be happy if the patient told you that I go to the washroom 3 or 4 times a day?
No, sir.
Then what else? You have to be very specific. What is it that you want to know out of a patient as far as chronic diarrhea is concerned?
Whether he's having fatty diarrhea, that is, he passes foul smelling stool.
So I want you to describe for all of us what is a fatty diarrhea stool.
Sir, it is a foul-smelling stool that floats on the surface of the cupboard and is sticky. Sometimes even after flushing, it may be floating on the surface. And patient generally has history of passing large volume stools at 2 to 3 times a day. And he also may give history of fat-soluble vitamin deficiencies.
What is this history of fat-soluble vitamin deficiency?
Patient can have bone pains because of vitamin D deficiency and defective vision because of vitamin A deficiency.
Over to you, Dr. Rajesh. Professor Rajesh, you can ask.
So can you just tell why do you think it is a pancreatic pain? Can you just answer that in a couple of
Sir, he has got significant amount of alcohol intake And also cigarette smoking is also significant. And his pains, continuous epigastric pain, the classic type B pain of chronic pancreatitis, which has been radiating to the back for 6 months. And independently, he's needing injections to relieve that pain. So that more likely suggests either the diagnosis of chronic pancreatitis or peptic ulcer, long-standing peptic ulcer disease.
You mentioned about steatoric stool. I don't know, there's a galaxy.
Dr. Ramesh, I think you can mute the, because you're the host, no? You can mute them directly.
My God.
Dr. Ramesh, I think you can mute the...
These people need not join at all, you know.
I know.
They need not join at all.
Only George, please mute.
I'm not able to mute them. Okay. Samir, you mentioned about steatotic stool. One of the very classical history that you get out of a patient who has a steatotic stool is when that stool drops into water, there are a lot of, the patient notices fat, oil droplets in that water. And that is something that is a very classical history that many of these patients will get. Okay. So you asked for chronic diarrhea. Samir, are you with us?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
You asked for chronic diarrhea. You said weight loss. You said about the pain, whether previous history of admissions, anything else that you would ask for?
Sir, I would also know if he has any family history of similar complaints. And
okay, we go on.
Whether he had any past history of jaundice.
Samir, would you ask him what relieves the pain? How often he visited the doctor? And does he have problem at night? What is your influence on the fullness of the abdomen after a meal?
Postprandial fullness.
I think most important is a person with 6 months pain. I think what you should ask is the periodicity. Is it there on all days? Does it come twice a week? Or most of the time he's in the hospital taking some analgesics? These are the things that will tell you, that is recurrent, acute and chronic, or just a chronic pancreatitis. And you have to give some information on this, postprandial fullness. So what is it that it is? Either it's a diabetic with gastroparesis, or there's some complication, and therefore it is that problem. So these are the things that should cross your mind. Yeah.
Okay. I think for the sake of the residents, I think it's important.
मेरी क्लास है मैं वो अटेंड कर रहा हूँ.
Hardeep, please mute. For the sake of the
please mute. Hardeep, please mute.
For the sake of the residents, I would just like to tell you that when you got to analyze a pain, it's a very, very easy mnemonic which you can follow called STAR. And each one with an alphabet with twice, that is, it will come twice. S, 2 S's, site and severity. 2 T's, type and time of day or whatever it is. 2 A's, associated factors and aggravating factors. 2 R's, radiation and relieving factors. Now, if you go through this, you will be able to actually analyze each and every pain. Besides, of course, this, you can take the treatment history or whatever it is. But this is something that for every patient with a pain, you must follow this mnemonic and you will not miss out on any feature. You understood, Samir?
Okay, yes.
Okay. So now, why is it that these patients have epigastric fullness? Madam did refer to
sir, either patient. Yes, sir. Either patient has diabetes and due to that he has developed diabetic gastroparesis, or patient may have patient has developed a pancreatic head malignancy, which now is compressing and causing gastric outlet obstruction, but there is no nausea or vomiting.
Okay.
And also, these patients can have groove pancreatitis, which is common in middle-aged patients and who have history of alcohol consumption. That also can present as abdominal distension and gastric outlet obstruction. But as such, this patient has no nausea or vomiting.
Okay. Okay. So now I'll let you. He has, of course, you would have guessed it. He has got 1 to 3 bowel movements a day, stool consistency type 5 or 6 Bristol form. Not infrequently, stools are bulky and difficult to flush, have a pale, oily appearance, and can be foul smelling. He has not lost weight, but is not able to gain weight despite consuming large meals. What do you make of the history so far? We have discussed it. We can just summarize everything and tell us what is there in your mind and what would be the difference.
So now a patient is having chronic pancreatitis with exocrine insufficiency, due to which he is not able to gain weight. So, and a second possibility also, I would consider he is having worsening of diabetes for which has not been treated. So that also can cause diabetic diarrhea, and patient is probably not able to gain weight. And third possibility of malignancy, but patient does not give history of losing weight or having loss of appetite. So this patient generally, I would consider exocrine insufficiency as the first possibility.
Can a very early malignancy present with steatorrhea and patient may not have any weight loss? Is it possible?
Yes, sir. Yes. Yes.
Okay. Professor Rajesh, any questions from your side?
No, I think so. Basically, it's a case of pancreatic pain, in which you can put in DD like recurrent pancreatitis or possible chronic pancreatitis. With I think you should mention maldigestion, no? Because from the history, what is obvious is maldigestion rather than diabetes. Going by the symptoms you definitely mentioned, because the most common symptom maldigestion is steatorrhea and not gaining weight. I think nothing is mentioned much about appetite. So whether he has increased appetite,
So the appropriate terminology should be maldigestion with overt fat maldigestion, which is causing steatorrhea, isn't it?
Yes.
Okay. Now tell me, what are the causes of pain, abdomen, and steatorrhea? A patient presents with you with steatorrhea also has pain abdomen. We mentioned about pancreatitis. Is there chronic pancreatitis? Are there any other causes of pain abdomen with steatorrhea?
Sir, if gastronoma patients can also have abdominal pain, and due to high because of acidic pH, the pancreatic enzymes will not work in the duodenum and may cause steatorrhea. And apart from that, obstructive jaundice.
They will present as watery diarrhea, Sameer. They will not present as steatorrhea.
Yes.
Just think of small bowel pathology, which can present with abdominal pain and steatorrhea.
Yes, ma'am. Ma'am, abdominal steatorrhea, lymphomas, Crohn's disease, eosinophilic enteritis, then IPSID, and tropical absorption, malabsorption, non-present.
You have seen so many. How many patients of Crohn's disease have you seen? Have you seen a patient presenting as steatorrhea? What percentage of Crohn's disease would present as steatorrhea?
Less than 10%.
That's a very safe figure to give. But I'm talking about other causes of pain abdomen with steatorrhea. What are the other causes of pain abdomen with steatorrhea? Could you get
vascular causes also can be present, sir, like chronic
vascular causes presenting as steatorrhea?
Steatorrhea.
Don't put your foot in your mouth. vascular causes, which vascular cause will present as steatoma? You heard of syndromes called blind loop syndrome?
Yes, sir. Post-surgical blind loop syndrome and small intestinal bacterial overgrowth also, but pain abdomen is not very predominant. They can present with pain abdomen and steatorrhea.
Yeah. Multiple jejunal diverticulosis.
Yes, diverticulosis.
Which causes bacterial overgrowth. There are, in fact, you must look at it in a much broader thing. This patient's history is quite classical, but pain abdomen plus steatorrhea can be because of a couple of other causes also. But in this patient, the diagnosis is probably staring at your face. Okay. Now, these are the physical thing. Nothing much by way of physical examination other than the fact that he's got probably a low BMI. And he's got some tenderness in the epithelium. How will you proceed to investigate this patient?
So first I would do a complete blood count, serum albumin.
What in the complete blood count are you looking for?
Sir, I would like to look for hemoglobin, MCV, and his platelet count. And then I would do a serum albumin, his electrolytes, creatinine, and blood urine nitrogen. Along with that, I would ask for abdominal X-ray to look for any calcifications.
Okay.
Examination?
Ma'am?
Examination.
Stool, yes, ma'am. Stool examination to look for fat globules. And I would ask for Sudan 3 staining. And if the investigation is available, I would look for fecal elastase and fecal chymotrypsin.
So what information does fecal elastase give you? And what is the value?
Sir, less than 100 fecal elastase, we can tell that moderate to severe pancreatitis, chronic pancreatitis, pancreatic insufficiency may be present in up to 90% of the cases. But mild pancreatic insufficiency, we can miss fecal elastase of less than 100.
Raja Gastro, please mute yourself. Raja Gastro. Okay. Now, between fecal elastase and fecal chymotrypsin, which one would be your preference? Why?
Sir, fecal elastase has more sensitivity and specificity, and compared to fecal chymotrypsin, plus it's more sensitive and specific of fecal elastase, and half-life also.
Okay. Fecal elastase is the preferred investigation because of the because it is more specific, and that is why people go in for fecal elastase. Okay. Now, this patient's plain X-ray abdomen did show multiple calculi as expected, and an ultrasound. These are the blood tests done. Now, fasting blood sugar is 108, and you find that most of the other blood tests are normal, except for probably a gamma GT, which is slightly high. Now, what next?
So basically, I would also rule out because we had suspected early pancreatic malignancy. I would do a CA99 and also a CT abdomen IV contrast pancreatic protocol. And after that, I would, for management, first I would consider to manage his pain and then his malabsorption. For pain, first I would try using analgesics.
We'll come to that management next later on. I'm talking about the investigations.
Investigation.
You will go in straight away for a CT scan.
Sir, ultrasound in the abdomen first I will do, sir.
So when you ask for an ultrasound, what are the things that you ask for? What is the information that you expect the radiologist?
Sir, whether there is any hypoechoic lesion in the head or hypoechoic lesion in the pancreatic parenchyma and dilated duct whether any calcifications are there, and any calcifications in the pancreatic parenchyma. Then also I would look for bile duct abnormalities, whether any biliary stricture due to chronic pancreatitis has been there. And
So
any
you look for,
complications? Any complications you look for?
yes, ma'am. Pseudocyst, any peripancreatic fluid collections like pseudocyst
Peripancreatic fluid collection will not be there. It's chronic pancreatitis, but
Chronic
you may get small pseudocysts around the bed of the pancreas. No?
yes,
So
ma'am.
there is some abdominal fluidness, all the symptoms are there. And yeah, continue.
anything else that you are going to you expect the radiologist to give you information about? You said the pancreas, the duct, the calculi, the mass. You also mentioned about the common bile duct, whether it is dilated or not, which would give an indication about the stricture. Anything else?
Sir, any vascular abnormality like portal vein or splenic vein thrombosis?
Splenic vein thrombosis. You will expect the radiologist to also comment about the splenic vein as well as the presence or absence of splenomegaly. Right? Okay.
And also because there's a chronic alcohol intake, any evidence of chronic alcoholic liver disease also.
So, what are the chances of this patient having a chronic liver disease?
Sir, patient has significant alcohol intake and he will fit into criteria of alcoholic use disorder. So he has a chance of having cirrhosis, at least CTPA, probably if we can do a fibroscan for this patient.
Okay. The ultrasound just shows a fatty liver, atrophic pancreas with the intraductal calculi in body and tail. There is no mass. Splenic vein is normal. CBD is normal. Gallbladder is normal. Are you content with the diagnosis or would you do something more?
GN, we have 5 minutes more.
Okay. Yes?
Yes, sir. But at least CA99 I would like to do, sir.
CA99 was normal.
Okay, sir.
Any role for EUS?
Ma'am, already we have EUS. We can see that only the proximal part, the head and body, distal tail may not be visible on EUS. So if we are suspecting malignancy, it is better to do a CT scan.
Okay. So now you can tell us, read the CT scan for us.
So this action section of arterial phase. So there are multiple calcifications and grossly dilated pancreatic duct with almost atrophic pancreatic parenchyma, and there's a dense calculi in the head of pancreas, and also multiple calculi are found in the duct of body and tail, and some parenchyma in the tail also is having calcification.
So this is a representative picture, but there is no mass as such.
No,
okay.
No masses.
How would you classify pancreatitis radiology? What is the classification known as?
Acute pancreatitis, CTSI is
we are not talking about acute pancreatitis.
Acute pancreatitis.
Patient does not have acute pancreatitis.
I'm not.
Have you heard of the Cambridge classification?
You
should read it up about the Cambridge classification of acute pancreatitis. Anyway, this is the abdominal CT. My question, the final multiple choice question for you is, what would you do next to confirm the diagnosis of chronic pancreatitis? You have 4 choices. You have to pick up the right one and tell us why you have picked it up and why not the others?
Sir, no further imaging or function tests are needed, I would choose, sir, because at least radiologically patient has been confirmed and clinically also he is having symptoms of malabsorption. So further testing will not give me...
So I want you to tell me, when will you do an MRI, MRCP with secretin enhancement? What does it tell you? What information does it?
So MRI, MRCP with secretin enhancement, if I want to look at the ductal morphology and if I'm planning to do any intervention and to delineate any stricture for that specifically. And MRI also we can find out if patient has features of early pancreatitis, early chronic pancreatitis.
And or when the diagnosis is in doubt. When will you do an endoscopic ultrasound?
Sir, endoscopic ultrasound also for if we have a diagnostic dilemma and early pancreatitis, early chronic pancreatitis, we can find out using the Rosenberg criteria. And for if we are having a head of pancreas lesion, we can delineate the lesion and also take biopsy. And if any intervention is being planned, we can do an endoscopic ultrasound guided either cyst drainage or antegrade ductal drainage.
Okay. Professor Rajesh, your time.
Yeah, so I think that you answered the questions correctly. So one thing is that for confirmation of diagnosis is when you have clinical consistent features with radiological testing. Also, you want to assess the complications of chronic pancreatitis like exocrine insufficiency, endocrine insufficiency, so all those things. And I think in this case there was some postprandial fullness, no? So I think you could mention maybe there was a possibility of some local complication like a pseudocyst also causing that. I mean, you can suspect, or otherwise it's features like gastroparesis. Those things you also want to rule out.
Madam Jayanti, any comments? This is the Cambridge classification which I was talking to you about. So basically, it's 4 grades, and it's important that you just have to know what this classification is all about. There are lots of classifications. There's one US classification also. You may be asked about these 2 classifications. You just have to brush up these 2 classifications. Okay? Madam Jayanti, any
I think
comments?
that's fine. I think when a question is asked, how will you investigate the patient? I think you should have classified as diagnostic tests, and then you have tests for management and tests for further evaluation. And in pancreas, it's usually exocrine and endocrine. The first thing you want to know, what is exocrine insufficiency, what's endocrine insufficiency, and then you go to the structural morphology. So have a system of classification. Otherwise, you get lost. So if you had started in a systematic way, the stool examination must come much ahead than all your other stuffs that you did, other things that you mentioned. Endoscopy may also have a role here to pick up any fundal varices. So these are the things that you need to pick up in these patients. Although it's uncommon, it's described quite a lot. And we have paper from Kerala in our own paper which shows that a combination of pancreatic and the liver in a person consuming alcohol is just 5%, 5 to 7%. The paper is from Amrita, and we have our own paper from Global Hospital. So then Dr. Ramesh had alluded to that question. It's only 5%. No one knows why. When you take alcohol, normally the pancreatic, when do you get it? Within 5 years, no? Whereas alcohol takes 10 years, which means that all alcoholics should have pancreatic pathology, but it does not happen. It's only in 5% there's an overlap. So one is protecting the other and preventing that to occur in their own thing. You understand? The person with pancreatitis does not get liver disease. And people have done endo-ultrasound, and ultimate bottom line is just about 5 to 8% can have an overlap. That's the answer.
Professor Varghese Thomas, any comments from you?
I think he has done fairly well. As ma'am suggested, probably stool examination, stool fat should have been told much earlier. And something about the fullness part of it. Pseudocyst should have been an ideal answer rather than
which you mentioned, the patient continues to have pain. What are the ideal candidates for an endotherapy?
Sir, for endotherapy, preferably the stone, patient should have an intraductal calculi, not pancreatic parenchymal calculi. And the calculus should be less than 5 mm, and it should be radio opaque. Radio lucid. And calculus should be preferably less than 5 mm.
Location in the head region with no stricture.
Head region, yes, ma'am. No evidence of stricture.
And there's not very stricture. Yeah.
So dilated duct with head stone in the head, 1 or 2, POSSI, that is not many stones, one or two stones in the head, radiolucent, and without any stricture. These are the basic important things, criteria that you'll go in for before you go in for endotherapy, right?
I think the size criteria which Samir mentioned, no, is not that important, because if you're doing endotherapy with ESWL, then size is not such an issue. Because primarily, as Dr. Ramesh is saying, no, is the stricture and those things which are more important.
If it is more than 5 mm, you have to go in for an ESWL. Otherwise, you can try to do a good sphincterotomy and extract. Okay. You may also be asked about pancreatic enzyme replacement therapy. What is the dose that you'll give, and what will you tell the patient? How does the patient take this pancreatic enzyme replacement?
So for us, available preparation is only entry coated. So a dose of 25,000 units has to be replaced with a meal. And if he's having a large meal, he can take even 2 tablets. And generally, we also prescribe a PPI with it, but it is entry coated. It won't make much difference.
PPIs are generally recommended only if you are giving non-entry. And it should be taken with meals. And what sort of diet do you advise the patient?
Sir, high calorie intake, high protein, and avoid fatty food.
Completely?
No, sir, low fat diet, not complete.
What type of oil would you recommend?
Sir, medium chain triglyceride, coconut oil, medium chain triglyceride will be better.
When you're using the pancreatic enzyme, do you have to tell the patient, are you vegetarian or a non-vegetarian? Is it important? Where are they derived from, these tablets?
From porcine.
Oh, very important, no? Tomorrow, yes, the patient should not say, you never told me about this.
What are the complications of pancreatic enzyme replacement therapy?
So there have been reported cases of stricture formation in fibrotic strictures in intestine. And
that's with very high doses.
High doses, yes.
Okay. Varghese, we'll go on to the second.
Yes. Hyperuricemia is another complication, because that is also one of the complications of enzyme replacement therapy. Okay, please go ahead with the second case. Ravi Kiran is supposed to discuss, no?
Ravi Kiran is here. Samir,
okay,
you can...
Samir, thank
you. Yes, sir.
Ravi?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Okay, so this is your case, right?
Yes,
okay.
Sir.
Tell.
Good evening, sir. Good evening, ma'am. 54-year-old man presented with a 6-month history of low-grade fever, night sweats, fecal urgency, and low back pain. 1 year ago, he had total proctocolectomy, ileal pouch anal anastomosis, and a loop ileostomy. The surgery took 9 hours as he had fulminant ulcerative colitis, severe anemia, and hypoalbuminemia. His post-operative course was complicated by the development of pelvic abscess, which was drained radiographically. 6 months later, the colorectal surgeon performed loop ileostomy closure.
Now, I want you to answer these questions.
Yes.
What are the indications for surgery in ulcerative colitis?
In cases of acute severe ulcerative colitis not responding to steroids as per Oxford criteria, sir, and persistent symptoms in spite of completing all the step-up therapy until biologicals also, then again indication for surgery. And
like Madam Jayanti said,
malignancy.
Can you be more systematic? Can you classify them into bundles and say that this is one bundle, this is one bundle, and the next is one bundle?
Complicated and uncomplicated.
Complicated by malignancy. Complicated and malignancy in ulcerative colitis also indication for surgery. In acute settings, in chronic settings, in acute settings as acute severe ulcerative colitis, in chronic refractory to therapy, or for complications of ulcerative colitis like a malignancy.
in acute settings or an emergency surgery, you will have only acute severe ulcerative colitis in that bundle, or you have something else also, some other conditions, which could be an emergency.
In toxic megacolon, sir.
Yes, then what else? I want you to just concentrate on emergency, acute complications. Think, I'm sure you'll be able to. No idea? You have suspected a perforation?
Yes, sir.
Bleeding?
But, yes, sir.
Patients presenting with these can cause, and some patients, there are some patients who can have severe pain. Of course, they could have microperforation, but these are all indications for an emergency surgery, which you cannot do with. And then you have the next bundle where you have patients who are, having a chronic problem, but still end up having surgery. One of them you said is malignancy or high-grade dysplasia.
Yes, sir. Yes.
Severe or ulcerative colitis not responding to medical therapy.
Yes, sir.
No? So
yes,
you
sir.
should learn how to classify it. Whenever you're asked a question, you must first of all try to classify it into groups. Then
yes,
it becomes very evident to the examiner that you know the subject. But if you go random here and there without touching anything, then the examiner quickly knows that you're just beating around the bush and you don't have a sound knowledge of the subject. So that is you must make it a habit.
Yes.
Professor Rajesh, any comments from your side?
Yeah, I think it's okay.
So, Ravi, tell me, okay, what are the surgical procedures that are done in ulcerative colitis?
So, again, it can be classified as whether the disease is limited, limited disease or extensive disease, or for complications. If it is for limited disease, you can go for a limited resection like left hemic.
Or is an emergency, or is an emergency.
Or is an emergency.
Is it or not? Yes. Elective or elective.
Elective or emergency, yes.
Ravi, I have an objection to your one comment that you made, that it depends on the extent of the disease. How does the extent of the disease affect the type of surgery?
If it is only limited to a left-sided colon, then left hemicolectomy also.
So if it is just a proctitis, you will just look at a surgery that will remove the rectum, retain the rest of the colon.
Is that the treatment for ulcerative colitis?
No, sir. No. No, sir. It will be a total proctocolectomy with ileal pouch anal anastomosis.
So one point that all of you must be very clear about is, unlike Crohn's, surgery for ulcerative colitis almost always involves the removal of the entire
colon.
It's a proctocolectomy. There's nothing, even if it is left-sided or a limited disease, you will still go in for a proctocolectomy. Why is it?
Because still the risk of malignancy or recurrent disease can be there in the rest of the colon.
You're right. So you should not say about the extent of the disease
with
reference to surgery. Okay. Now, you said proctocolectomy with ileoanal pouch anastomosis. Is there any other surgery?
Patient comes with severe bleeding 20-30 times per day for last 1 month. So what will be your treatment option?
With for a diversion ileostomy.
Keep answering. One is diversion ileostomy, number one. Number two, you can also do a subtotal colectomy. Subtotal colectomy and just have the little rectal pouch, especially if the person is of the younger age and has not gone through the family. So those are the patients where we retain, we don't meddle much with the pelvis. So we just do a diversion ileostomy, leave the patient alone, and then go in for the second surgery later when everything settles down. And it's easier to manage just the rectal pouch that's there with local treatment. So you have to again classify. That's why I said emergency versus patients with elective surgery.
You see, elective.
So
You're not answering. Answer now.
Yeah, answer.
Yes. Yes. Either it's an acute setting or an emergency or an elective setting. In cases of emergency, you can go for ileostomy, diversion ileostomy, and subtotal colectomy. Hello.
Yes. Carry on.
Yes.
If it is elective,
then you can go for a total proctocolectomy with ileal pouch anastomosis.
So we won't go into the details about pouch, types of pouch. That is a surgical topic. But can you define for us steroid refractory disease and steroid dependent disease?
Yes. Steroid refractory disease is in spite of adequate dose of steroids, not able to maintain induced remission within 4 weeks is called a steroid refractory.
What do you mean by adequate dose of steroids?
And steroid.
Your network is bandwidth is
1 milligram per kg, which is max of penicillin. Sir, am I audible, sir?
Your voice is breaking. What is steroid refractory and what is steroid dependent?
Hello.
Samir, you take over.
Samir?
Yes,
steroid means unable to. Hello?
Yeah.
Yes, steroid dependent disease would be unable to wean off the steroids within 4 weeks of stopping, sir. Mm-hmm. Again, the disease remission goes into relapse.
Okay, and refractory?
And steroid refractory is in steroids. Patient is not able to achieve remission, sir.
Okay.
Yes.
Now, this is what I want you to say. Steroid responsive, steroid dependent, and steroid refractory. Steroid dependent is ulcerative colitis defined as steroid dependent if glucocorticoids cannot be tapered to less than 10 milligrams per day within 3 months of starting steroids without recurrent disease, or if relapse occurs within 3 months of stopping glucocorticoids. That is steroid dependent disease.
Yes.
And steroid refractory diseases, lack of a meaningful clinical response to glucocorticoids up to doses of prednisone 40 to 60 milligrams within 30 days of oral therapy or 7 to 10 days of intravenous. So these are all very, very specific. So you should not be using terminologies like adequate dose or appropriate or time period and all those things. You must be very, very specific about the time period as well as the dose. Okay? Anything from your side, Professor Rajesh?
Yeah, I think that's fine. Yeah, we can. Are we discussing the case? I mean, I think there were some symptoms in the case, no? So
yeah.
Yes, sir.
Yes. No, I went straight to the some of these questions. Okay. Yeah. You want to ask something else? Yeah.
I think one more question was that the complication.
Yeah. So, Samir, what are the short-term complications and long-term complications of
Samir or Ravikiran?
Ravikiran. Ravi is back?
Ravi's back? No.
No.
Then Samir.
Samir?
Yes, sir.
Yeah. What will you explain to the patient? Patient being prepared for surgery, what are the complications that are likely to happen?
Sir, first patient will have a long-term stoma. If you're not planning an ileal, we are planning a colostomy with total proctectomy. Or if you're an ileal pouch anal anastomosis, the patient may have a risk of pouchitis in the future. And also, we should prepare the patient for perioperative complications like sepsis. If patient has had a perforation, deep vein thrombosis, and
so complications that can happen in the perioperative period, the post-operative period, and long-term complications. So what are the complications that can happen in the perioperative and post-operative, immediate post-operative?
Sir, perioperatively, patient can have a leak of fistula formation unlikely, and formation of an due to leak collection and infection of the collection, and intra, because these patients are at risk of having a DVT, that is another complication. And in immediate perioperative, patient can have anastomotic site leak, and
so sepsis, leak. Sometimes bleeding can happen.
Bleeding, yes, sir.
Okay.
Bleeding.
And if these patients are bedridden for some time, you can have thrombosis, deep vein thrombosis. Then long-term complications.
Sir, long-term complications. If patient has had colostomy and if we had underlying PSC, these patients tend to have peristomal varices in about 30 to 40% of cases. And then peristomal hernia, parastomal hernias. And if patient has ileal pouch anastomosis, then risk of pouchitis is there. And if there is a rectal stump that is now being left with ileal pouch anastomosis, that can develop inflammation. And we also need to do surveillance for malignancy after 10 to 12 years for these patients only. But this chance is very less.
Any other complications that can happen in the long term?
Long term, if patient was only ulcerative colitis, some extraintestinal manifestation can present like PSC. Others like sacroiliitis and
I'm talking about local complications.
Local complications
related to the surgery.
Incisional hernia, parastomal hernias.
Okay. They can have long-term sexual dysfunction.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Especially if ileal pouch anal anastomosis is there for females. That is why they prefer to do a colostomy before, and then they will go ahead with after patient conceives and after deliveries, then they will do an anastomosis.
And they can have pelvic floor dysfunction as well, because sometimes dissection and all involves a muscle.
Yes, sir. Adhesions and then intestinal obstruction.
Okay. So we continue with the case. Since the closure of the stoma, the patient reported that he has never felt well, poor appetite, pelvic discomfort, difficulty in sitting because of pain, not able to gain weight, physical examination, anemia with long surgical scars. There's tenderness at the low spine, particularly the tip of the coccyx, and he's got slightly high counts and he's anemic. What would you do next and why?
Gian, shall we take the next candidate then?
Yes.
Joe?
Yes, sir.
Okay,
Joe.
Yes, sir.
So you've been following this question. What
can you just show once more?
Sir, it's actually a patient who had undergone IPAA for ulcerative pulmonary colitis. And he's been, you were talking about the complications and the definitions. Now, since the closure of the stoma, the patient reports that he is not felt well, and he has some poor appetite, he has pelvic dysfunction, and he has pain, and he has physical exam showed signs of anemia.
That's okay. You don't have to repeat everything, but what
Actually, as per the labs, he has got an increased total count and low hemoglobin. Yes, so most probably he'll be having an inflammation of the post-surgery complication like pouchitis, and also since he has got a pouch, maybe a pouch failure that is causing malabsorption and leading to anemia.
Pouchitis, pouch failure causing malabsorption and anemia. How do you explain that?
Anyway, sir, his total count is elevated, so pouchitis is a possibility, sir. And maybe another reason, maybe he's having bleeding from the mucosa that is causing low hemoglobin. Inflammation of the pouch causing bleeding.
And that causes low hemoglobin. But what you mentioned, malabsorption. Did you mention malabsorption?
No, sir, sorry.
You should be very careful about the words.
No, sir, malabsorption.
Okay. So what would you do next and why? What investigations would you do to find out what this patient has?
So after these total count and hemoglobin, definitely a pouch scopy, sir.
Pouch scopy. Okay. What is it?
To assess
what is it that you're looking for?
Actually, to assess the mucosa of the pouch, whether we can find any inflammation of the mucosa, any signs of pouchitis, and to assess the pouch.
Okay. Any other investigation that you would like to go in for because you want to know what exactly this patient has got pain in the tip of the coccyx and high counts.
And so definitely an imaging, CT or a MRI pelvis to see if there is any collection.
Between CT and MRI pelvis, what would be your choice? Why?
No, that's the way you answer. No, you cannot say I'll do CT or MRI pelvis. No, you have to. The patient is in front of you.
Okay,
you cannot put the option open to the patient. No? Answer very carefully. Otherwise, one more question is coming. No? Why did you ask one for the other? What is your preferred investigation and why? That's what sir is asking.
An MRI pelvis, I would prefer an MRI pelvis.
Why?
Because post colectomy and when there's a pouch, and to assess the pelvic region to look for collection, and so MRI pelvis would be a better option.
The superiority of an MRI over a CT lies in actually delineation of collections around or even the sinuses and the fistulae. That is why we usually go in for MR pelvis over the CT scan if you have to evaluate for a pelvic problem, a pelvic complication of IBD or a post-operative problem. So you should be very clear about the investigation that you want. Is there any other simple investigation that can be done? Have you heard of an investigation called pouchogram? Imaging?
So, yes, sir. Pouchogram to like a barium study, sir?
A contrast study.
A contrast. To, yes, sir.
Okay. So basically, this is what was done in this patient. Can you tell us what you see here? Can you read this film for us?
Actually, in this contrast pouchogram,
Abhishek, please mute. Abhishek, mute.
We can see the pouches well filled with the contrast, but at the distalmost part of the pouch, there is a
There is?
It's stricture, sir. There is narrowing of the lumen.
Where is the stricture? Here? This is a stricture that you're referring to?
Sir, beyond that.
I think there's a web,
Yeah.
is it? You think there's a web there? There's no
Pardon?
structure. No, I'm asking him, you think there's a web there? Esophageal web like?
Yeah, I know.
That's
What
not,
do you see?
What are you saying? There's a normal one. It's going into the ileum, no?
This
You
is
can see
the,
the variant flowing into the ileum.
Okay, it's a catheter. I'm sorry.
this is a catheter. Okay.
Okay.
You thought this is a stricture. My God. Actually, you have put your foot into your mouth, actually. Huh?
But he did not say it's a fistula, no?
I know. What are you seeing? This is a,
The walls are irregular, sir. And,
okay. Anything else that you see?
Again, I think they've never seen one, so you can just explain.
Yeah. So basically, this is why the reason why I put this up is we have lost track of all these conventional studies. Basically, this is a tube pouchogram. Here you find a very adequately filled up pouch with the contrast going into the ileum, and there's absolutely no dilatation, no proximal dilatation. But what you see is extravasation here. Can you see this small thing, Joe?
yes, yes.
This one. So this is a small extravasation, and this is clearly an abnormal finding. And it should not be seen in patients who've got a normal pouch. And this indicates to you that at that time he had a postoperative complication, and that has left behind a residual problem like this. And that is what I'm going to come to. What is the next? The other thing which you must always comment is on these the walls. Are they shaggy? Are they clear, very regular without much of ulcerations? So here, actually, if you look, it's quite okay. It's not all that bad. Sometimes you in extensively ulcerated pouches, you'll find a lot of there'll be a lot of shaggy margins. But here, definitely, the margins are a bit, irregular, and here probably there are some ulcers. So this is what is abnormal, and that is why we go on to the next question. Basically, based on the clinical presentation imaging study, what is your diagnosis? I think now it becomes very simple.
Yes,
What would be your diagnosis? Presacral sinus. So that is what basically it's a common surgical complication, and it is an end result of a presacral leak, but patients can present with characteristic pain and tenderness in the coccyx, and it should not be confused with Crohn's disease of the pouch, and it can be treated with endoscopy or surgery. Who's going to take up the next one? Next question.
Snija.
We are 9 o'clock.
Snija.
Sir.
Are you there?
Snija,
Yes, sir.
Okay.
so what is this, Snija?
A manometer.
What manometer is it? What is the type? What are the types of manometer?
High resolution manometer.
High resolution. Further classified, it's an impedance manometer. Why do you say it is an impedance manometer?
There's a balloon at the end.
Where's the balloon? I can't see the balloon. This one? Is this the balloon that you're referring to? It's not the balloon. What do you mean by impedance manometer?
Small.
Yeah. What do you mean by impedance manometer?
We'll check the comments of the wall. At the same time,
No, your voice is you're also suffering from poor network.
Audio is not clear.
Aniket?
Aniket?
Yes, sir.
Okay, take over.
Tell me, what is meant by impedance or solid state manometer?
So in impedance catheter, there will be multiple points, and it will measure the resistance between two particular points. If it is the liquid medium, the resistance will be less, and if it is the air or gaseous, the resistance will be more. Then there will be a dip in the gaseous. If the gas will be there, then there will be the increase in the graph. Graph will pick up, and if it is the liquid thing, the graph will come down. It will dip in the graph.
So the impedance is low. These are the
Yes,
the electrodes type of thing, and
impedance.
This looks at the impedance between the current passes from here to here through whatever is surrounding this. And if it is liquid, it is low impedance. If it is air, the impedance is high. That is why it is called impedance. Earlier manometers used to be the liquid ones, where you used to have water flowing at a regular rate. But this one is called an impedance. Okay, now you can read the story and then we'll go on to the case. Yeah.
A 24-year-old woman present to clinic for evaluation of refractory reflux symptoms. She notes a 3-year history of reflux and dysphagia, which is painless and non-progressive. She reports heartburn and regurgitation, particularly at night when lying flat. She is maintained on esomeprazole 40 mg 3 times daily with no significant improvement. She was told that she has a Scatzi ring and was previously dilated 3 times without effect. Her most recent outside endoscopy was reported to be normal.
Okay, so now what more information? Do you think that this history is enough, or would you like to have some more details from the history?
So she is telling she is having 3-year history of dysphagia and reflux. I want to know that whether it is with the solid or liquid. It started with what?
It's to the liquids and solids. It is non-progressive.
Yeah.
Anything else that you would like to? We know that it is painless. Anything else that you would like to know?
I want to ask that whether she is having a feeling of food stuck on the chest.
How will that help you?
That will. Is there any?
No, you said you would ask whether the food gets stuck periodically in the chest. Why? How does that help you? What information does that give you? If I say that it is getting stuck frequently, what does it tell you?
Is there any compression or obstruction, or is there any stricture is there or not?
So food getting stuck in the chest is indicative of a stricture.
Indicative of some obstructions are in the esophagus, thoracic esophagus.
Mm-hmm. Anything else that you will ask for as far as food getting stuck? Approach to dysphagia. Now, what I am trying to look at is how well you can analyze a history of dysphagia. So you said we have some information. I have withheld a little bit of information. I want you to find out more about this dysphagia.
Where the dysphagia is continuous or it is the intermittent?
Okay, so it is intermittent or continuous. An intermittent dysphagia is suggestive of?
In case of eosinophilic esophagitis, the dysphagia will be intermittent. And in case of obstruction or in Scatzi ring also, the dysphagia will be continuous.
Okay, Scatzi ring, it will be continuous, and eosinophilic esophagitis, it will be intermittent. Any other common examples that you can give? Intermittent dysphagia versus continuous dysphagia. How many cases of eosinophilic esophagitis have you seen?
Very few cases, sir.
Then why do you want to pick up this as an example?
Let's think of luminal, no? Luminal and non-luminal, no? So luminal will be continuous, but once it comes to the mucosa and the wall, it will become intermittent.
Yes, sir.
And if it's
In case of
obstructive,
immortality,
it's obstructive, it will become progressive occlusion. So just keep in mind esophagus. When all in the lumen, can you get intermittent pain? When in the wall, you get intermittent pain. That is all mechanical, and then motility disorders. Broadly, these are only two classifications. So in that context, I was asking you, when all can you get intermittent, non-progressive dysphagia? That's the question.
yes, sir. In case of a motility disorder, also the like in esophageal spasm and all, and here the dysphagia will be intermittent, sir. And in achalasia also initially the dysphagia will be intermittent, but it is both with solid and liquid. And in case of extrinsic compression, it will be continuous.
It will be continuous. Okay. So you said intermittent versus continuous dysphagia. Okay. Intermittent by usually indicates probably one of the esophageal motor disorders, motility disorders, whereas continuous, we can take it for granted that it is probably something organic. Now, anything else that you would like to ask?
How it relieves, whether it is relieving.
So what will you ask in patients? What do they do to relieve? So what is a common history you'll find in patients who have got a esophageal motility disorder? What do they do to relieve themselves of this problem?
They try to drink a lot of water, or they would try to
they usually try to drink a lot of water, but that any person with a dysphagia, food getting stuck will do it. That's a reflex.
Yes.
Many of these patients get relief by actually raising their arms above their head.
Yes.
Keeping it for some time. You understand? So that's a very common thing which these people do to relieve themselves. So you said painless dysphagia, non-progressive, and you have heartburn, regurgitation. Will you also ask about nighttime, nocturnal, nasal regurgitation and choking? What would that take?
Yes, sir. Yes, in case of severe reflux, a patient will have nasal regurgitation and choking.
Yes. What is the difference between reflux and regurgitation? What is reflux and what is regurgitation?
Reflux is the when the content of stomach comes in the esophagus, it is the reflux. But regurgitation is that when effortlessly the content from either esophagus or the stomach content they come in the mouth. So that is the regurgitation.
Which is active and which is passive? Which of the two is active, involving active diaphragmatic contraction, and which one will be passive?
So, ma'am, reflux is the passive, and regurgitation is the active.
Always Murphy's law, no? Always speak the wrong. It's just the reverse. That is what is Murphy's law. Whatever you say will always,
It's the other way around.
It's just the other way around.
Okay, reflux is the active.
Obviously, reflux is contracting the stomach and pushing the food into the food pipe. Whereas regurgitation just passive phenomenon. It is just a regurg without involvement of the muscular contraction, the diaphragm or the abdomen.
You must be able to actually give a definition for reflux versus regurgitation versus vomiting. Do you understand the difference?
Yeah, all the three.
You understand the difference? What is reflux? What is regurgitation? What is vomiting?
Forceful contraction.
Yes, sir.
I think you should be very, very clear about the differences. Okay, fine.
What will be the difference in reflux between achalasia cardia and patients with reflux disease, acid reflux? Difference in the reflux. Can you get a reflux in achalasia cardia?
Yes, ma'am.
Can you get a heartburn?
No, in achalasia we are not getting heartburn.
30% can get heartburn. So the heartburn does occur because of food stasis and bacterial fermentation and acid production. That's why the case is kept there. You mentioned that. What's your comment on the esomeprazole given 3 times a day? What's your comment on that? There's an esomeprazole 40 milligram 3 times a day.
Yes.
What's your comment on that?
It is a high dose PPI, ma'am.
Is this the way you give? Is this the recommendation? You get 3 times a day?
No, ma'am.
What's the recommendation?
40 milligram OD or twice daily, ma'am.
How do you give it? What do you tell the patient? Just pop in a tablet at 8 o'clock and pop a tablet at 8 o'clock in the evening? What do you tell the patient? How does he take it? I think they're deviating from this. All these are very simple questions, okay? That means it only tells us that we're not seeing cases in the outpatient. So once you see cases in the outpatient, you have to give a prescription. How would you give a prescription for a reflux disease? These are the questions that we asked in the exam. Simple questions. Yeah. Continue, Dr. GM.
Yeah. So I think you should read up more about proper prescriptions of PPI and the management of reflux disease. Okay. So now you've seen this. Anyway, this patient had this particular investigation. What is this investigation and what is your interpretation? Have you seen this investigation being done?
Yes, sir.
What is this investigation? How do you do it?
This is the high resolution manometry report, and it is showing, sir.
Esophageal manometry. Don't just say high resolution manometry. Esophageal manometry.
Yeah, high resolution esophageal manometry, and the upper line showing the
what is this? What does this indicate?
Upper esophageal sphincters.
What does this indicate?
Lower esophageal sphincter.
Okay. So what does it show to you?
So in this, it is like pan-esophageal pressurization.
Where is the swallow reflex? Where is the swallow reflex? Where do you think the swallow this thing has been given? Can you show that in the US? Where is it?
He has access to pointer.
No. Ian, you have to show.
Yeah, it's written there, swallow, no? The patient is given a swallow. There's mentioned the ninth
can
swallow.
you see that?
And there it's mentioned that up, the one is going up.
Hello?
So what would you expect normally?
Yeah.
What would you expect when there's a swallow? What do you expect to see in the lower sphincter?
There should be a relaxation of lower sphincter, ma'am.
And
that is not present here. The IRP seems to be high because it is always a green color. There is no relaxation after swallowing.
Okay. So this is the swallow where it starts. You would expect this thing to become blue.
Lower pressure zone.
Okay.
Yes.
What is lying here? What is this? What does this indicate? This part?
This is the cardia of the stomach.
Very good. So now, what is your interpretation and what is your diagnosis?
There is failure of relaxation of the lower sphincter as evidenced by the continuous increased pressure in the LES. And therefore, it is showing achalasia cardia. And there is we can see the green lines in the whole esophagus, and that is suggestive of pan-esophageal pressurization. It is, you can see in the more than 20% of the swallows.
More than 20%.
Therefore,
Okay. So,
it is
so
suggestive of achalasia cardia type 2, sir.
It is suggestive of achalasia. How do you classify achalasia cardia?
It is 3 types of type 1, 2, 3. Type 1 achalasia cardia, it is the classic achalasia where there will be no peristalsis. The type 2 is the pan-esophageal pressurization, where will be a continuous high pressure zone in the esophagus in more than 20% of the swallows. And your type 3 is the spastic achalasia, where in the lower part of the esophagus, there will be high pressure zone where we can see spastic segment in the lower esophagus.
And what is pseudoachalasia?
Pseudoachalasia, when there is the mechanical obstruction and their peristalsis will be present and IRP will be high. It is called pseudoachalasia.
Secondary achalasia?
Pardon, ma'am?
What is secondary achalasia? How do you differentiate pseudoachalasia from secondary achalasia? So secondary achalasia is the compression, when you have fundic growth, when you have nodes, those are all secondary. Pseudoachalasia is a paraneoplastic manifestation in celiac disease, melanomas. They're all pseudo. That is, they have a manifestation like achalasia, but the cause is not secondary, nor is it primary.
So your diagnosis in this patient is type 2 achalasia, isn't it?
Yes.
Okay. Any other investigation? Would you do any other investigation? Are you happy with it?
Sir, I want to do one OGD scopy to look for any pseudoachalasia or secondary achalasia before proceeding towards the management.
OGD will tell you about secondary achalasia.
Prashant, please mute. Prashant, please mute.
Any obstruction, is there any mechanical obstruction or?
Yeah. So what madam said, it is secondary achalasia. So
yes,
you see, you need to rule out this secondary achalasia by doing an upper GI endoscopy, isn't it?
Yes, sir.
Okay. So
also looking for a hiatus hernia is most important. Normally to get picked up in HREA, but in case you miss, you have to look very closely because when you're planning for certain procedures, hiatus hernia comes in the way.
Yes, ma'am.
Quickly tell us what are the management options?
So management can be a medical or endoscopic or surgical. The medical management consists of calcium channel blockers or nitrates, but there is no proven
One is
role.
pharmacotherapy. Okay, next.
Second is the pneumatic dilatation. Second is the botulinum toxin injection.
Injection therapy.
Pharmacotherapy. Okay. Then pneumatic dilatation, where we can do a CRE balloon dilatation. Yes, ma'am.
Is it CRE balloon dilatation or
it's CRE? You said CRE. What are the types of dilators in the esophagus?
Savary-Giller dilator and CRE balloon dilator.
Any other dilator?
And what, ma'am?
Any other dilator?
Ma'am, it can be Bupi dilator.
When do you use a CRE dilator? What are the indications for CRE balloon dilatation?
In case of malignant...
I think just ask them to read all this.
Yeah, I think you should read. CRE, Rigiflex dilators for pneumatic dilatation. They're all, you must read what are the types of dilators and what are the various indications for use of the various types of dilators. Okay, you'll be asked in the instrument section. You may be given one dilator and then you'll be asked. Or even if you have a short presentation like this, you'll be asked. Okay?
Yes, sir.
Can we call in Nija if she's ready?
Rajesh, any questions from your side, Rajesh? As far
as I think it is fine. Yeah.
Fine.
Actually, it's not the balloon is not CRE balloon. It's Achillea balloon or
Achillea
pneumatic balloon, commonly like Rigiflex and.
What is the full form of CRE?
Controlled radial expansion.
Controlled radial expansion. So, what is the biggest problem with the pneumatic dilators that are used for achillea?
In pneumatic dilatations, there will be only tangential, both tangential and radial force. Because of that, there will be more friction in pneumatic dilatation compared to CI dilatation, where there will be only radial force.
Is the pneumatic dilatation which you do for achillea controlled or uncontrolled?
That is uncontrolled.
You don't have any control. That is the biggest problem, isn't it? Even though you have 3 sizes, but you don't have a control.
Yes.
No? So CRE is controlled radial expansion, which is usually through the scope, and then you do it under vision, direct vision.
And in the same sitting, you can increase from 30 to 35 to 40, but that is not possible with a. You should never use the same, and the same sitting, you never use all the 3 dilators, okay? For the achillea, you have to take a different station for the next. And the third, the same will take. You understand? Remember that. You must know the differences between CRE and Rigiflex dilator.
Okay?
Yes.
Okay. These are the 3 types you mentioned, and it's Snija, can you come in?
Yes.
The last. Okay.
Okay, thank you, Aniket. Snija, are you ready?
I'm ready, sir.
Okay.
A 68-year male presents with a 6-week history of watery diarrhea. He has mild abdominal cramps and urgency that are partially relieved after bowel movements, but denies GI bleeding, weight loss, fever, or fecal incontinence.
So what more do you want out of the history? This is a history that has been given. Six-week history in a 68-year-old man.
6 weeks. Any history of fever?
Mm-hmm. There is no history of fever.
Any history of similar complaint in the past?
This is the first time he is having. So you said history of this is similar history in the past. Why did you ask? And what is there in your mind when you ask for a similar problem in the past?
Like a chronic condition, or is it an acute condition? Is it a precipitation?
You have a patient who presents with a 6-week history of watery diarrhea. Isn't it chronic?
Yes, sir.
Then why do you bring in acute?
No, sir. Acute condition or a chronic condition?
What is this acute condition and chronic condition that you're talking of?
Acute condition could be an infection or a malignancy. Chronic condition could be an inflammatory bowel disease, or it could be an IBS.
Now, acute condition, you mentioned about malignancy and an infection.
Infection.
Okay. Which infections would go on for 6 weeks?
So parasitic infection. Parasitic infection can last for 6 weeks.
What parasitic infection?
And amoebiosis.
Amoebiosis is going on for 6 weeks.
Yersinia and Aeromonas.
Amoebiosis is going on for 6 weeks. Aniket?
Yes, sir.
So you are also suffering from network bandwidth.
Then Kuruvilla is there.
Kuruvilla?
Hello,
sir.
Yeah, sir.
So how would you analyze this? What more information do you want out of this patient?
Sir, I would like to know about the first, I would like to differentiate whether it is a small bowel diarrhea or large bowel diarrhea by asking any GI bleed or tenesmus. Then differentiate whether it is a small bowel diarrhea. And following that, since after, then I want to differentiate whether it is any osmotic or a secretory diarrhea or a fatty diarrhea. So and associated any complications of any malabsorption, associated features of any malabsorption of vitamin deficiencies, since the patient is having a chronic diarrhea from the history. And predisposing factors of any inflammation also I would be looking for. And inflammatory causes like inflammatory bowel disease. And since it's an old age patient, ischemia also I would like to keep it as a possibility.
Now you have
and
a
also
68-year-old man, 6-week history,
okay, sir.
Diarrhea, but there are abdominal cramps, sir. There is urgency.
Okay, sir.
So what does it convey?
It suggests that urgency is suggestive of rectal involvement, sir.
The frequency is very high. The passes about 12 to 14 times per day. And anything else that you would ask for? Nocturnal frequency?
The nocturnal frequency to differentiate between any functional or organic disease, sir. Or nocturnal frequency more in favor of organic diseases.
And then if we are thinking of a large bowel diarrhea, what would be on the history? What are the things that you would ask for? We've asked for GI bleeding, we asked for weight loss, fever, fecal incontinence. Anything else?
Incomplete evaluation, tenesmus.
Okay, urgency is there. He's got abdominal cramps, so I think basically it indirectly points out towards the presence of a tenesmus. But anything else?
Sir, then. No, sir. No.
Dr. Rajesh, anything else that you would expect out of a candidate asking or describing a large bowel diarrhea?
Important negative factors of the small bowel, whether it is a foul smelling or a non-foul smelling, also I would like to add, sir.
Yes. And you also ask for extraintestinal manifestations.
Extraintestinal manifestations of IBD.
Never forget that. Not only IBD, any of the infections and all can have extraintestinal manifestations, isn't it?
Okay, sir.
Okay. Okay. So what are the causes of a chronic watery diarrhea?
I would like to classify in terms of, sir, osmotic diarrhea and secretory diarrhea. And in the osmotic diarrhea, basically malabsorption defect, especially carbohydrate malabsorptions. And secretory diarrhea, I would like to think of, again, I would like to classify in terms of initially I would like to think of any motility disorders.
So it is osmotic versus secretory versus motility versus inflammatory.
And inflammatory, sir. And also malignancy also I'd like to keep in mind, especially colonic carcinoma and lymphomas, since it's a 6-week history and old age people.
What is the example told for secretory?
Sir. Secretory, sir.
Secretory, it was not clear to me.
Secretory, sir, it can be diabetic autonomic neuropathies in this age group.
Secretory diarrhea?
Sir, diabetic autonomic neuropathies in this age group. Then hyperthyroidism, secretory diarrhea. Endocrine causes like hyperthyroidism.
All these conditions you have enumerated as a cause for secretory diarrhea.
Secretory diarrhea, sir.
Are actually causes for diarrhea, which is because of motility. Why does hyperthyroidism cause diarrhea?
Sir. Increased motility.
Increased secretion?
Increased secretion.
Increased secretion? What are the causes of a secretory diarrhea? Professor Verghese Thomas wants to know.
Sir, I would like to classify in terms of disorders of motility and endocrine causes, and as well as
Just list out, doctor, what are the causes of secretory diarrhea? Name some common cause of secretory diarrhea.
Bacterial toxins, madam. Initially, I would like
What's the most common cause of secretory diarrhea? Infection.
Infection, madam.
What
Which infection?
With
bacterial infections.
What bacteria? You have to go and have a dinner now, no?
Bacteria by Shigella, Salmonella, E. coli.
Causing watery diarrhea.
No, Shigella, colon, no.
Okay, agreed. Toxigenic, those producing toxins. Agreed.
Okay, sir. Then it can cause, okay, sir. Classified as secretory diarrhea is classified as it can be due to rapid intestinal transit, or it can be due to iron transport defect. It can be due to intestinal ischemia, sir, along with the toxins. In the iron transport defect,
you're very confused. You're very, very confused. I think you've mixed up everything together. You've mixed up motility with secretory. You're occasionally talking about
and ischemia.
Ischemia. I don't know how you're able to connect all these things. The question was very, very specific. What is the commonest cause of secretory diarrhea in our country?
Okay, sir.
What is the mechanism in secretory diarrhea? I think if you go that way, it may be easier to.
Sir, there are basically.
What is the basic mechanism? Don't go for. Sometimes there are multiple causes for diarrhea, but what is the basic mechanism?
Secretagogues, endogenous toxins. In India, it is cholera. Enterotoxin secreted by cholera is a
either excessive secretion or decreased absorption of the fluid.
Okay, sir.
Okay, toxins you already mentioned. You said secretagogues. What are those?
Secretagogues can be endogenous or exogenous, sir. In endogenous secretagogues, neuroendocrine tumors will come, sir. Example like carcinoid tumors.
Okay. Next.
Then, sir, whenever there is a mucosal disease is involved diffusely, that can lead to loss of intestinal surface area like celiac disease and lymphomas. Any mucosal infiltrating IPSIDs can present with secretory diarrhea, sir. Then rapid intestinal transit.
No, that is no, you are mixing up. Secretory diarrhea is the net secretion of fluid into the lumen of the intestine, which cause fluidity and then produce diarrhea. Okay.
Okay, sir.
You tell us what is the stool examination show in patients with inflammatory diarrhea, in patients with motility diarrhea, in patients with secretory diarrhea, and also.
Okay, sir. In inflammatory diarrhea, I would like stool examination will be showing pusstules and pusstules, sir. In
pusstules and RBCs and all.
Pusstules and RBC.
Pusstules and RBCs. That is an inflammatory diarrhea.
Inflammatory diarrhea.
Okay. How would you diagnose
fecal calprotectin?
Fecal calprotectin. Okay. You've picked up the simplest one first. Very good. What about motility diarrhea?
Sir, motility type.
What will the stool examination show?
It will be normal.
Normal. Okay. What will the stool examination in osmotic diarrhea?
Sir, osmotic type, we have to look at stool pH and stool reducing substances. Stool pH less than 5.5 suggestive of carbohydrate malabsorption, and reducing substances such as sugar also give a fair idea of reducing substance will be positive in carbohydrate malabsorption. Then osmotic gap can be looked, sir.
How do you look at osmotic gap?
2 into 5. That is two different. I'm not remembering.
So you have to.
You said osmotic. So something regarding osmotic
Sir, you have to add sodium and potassium and multiply into 2, divide
So
minus
you check the stool
290.
osmolality
Okay, sir. Stool osmolality.
and whether the sodium and potassium added together will account for it, or if there is any deficit.
Deficit, sir.
Okay, I think you have to read.
You have
Okay,
to
sir.
read all this. Okay. So basically, by way of investigations, the most important thing in this patient would be, of course, stool examination. Anything else that you will do? This patient has got diarrhea, 6 weeks, 68-year-old man with abdominal cramps, urgency. We've done a stool examination, which does not show anything much. What will you do next?
Sir, it is I would like plan in favor of diagnosing and for generalized.
Whatever.
Sir, hello.
Come again.
Sir, diagnosis I would like to plan in terms of initially to plan for investigation. Initial basic investigation I would like to plan in favor of the diagnosis. I would like to look for any complete blood count. I'd like to look for total count for raised possibility of infections along with CRP and ESR and neutrophilic manifestations also. I'd be neutrophilic increase also I'd be looking for. Then CRP and ESR is also look for any features of any infections.
Okay, then, they are not normal.
Then, sir, since it's a 68-year-old with 6 weeks history of diarrhea, by markers, I would look for any immunosuppressed stage in this patient. So HIV also should be looking in this patient. Okay. And then, sir, specific investigation, I would like to look at, do a OGD-scopy and take a D2 biopsy to look for the mucosal lesions.
Abdominal cramps, urgency, you're going to do an upper GI endoscopy.
Watery diarrhea.
Okay, you want to take a biopsy from second part of the GI.
D2 for watery diarrhea.
Okay. Anything else that you would like to, that is normal?
Okay, sir. Then I would like to do a complete ileal colonoscopy for evaluation of the large bowel and the terminal ileum to look for the any features of inflammatory bowel disease. And I will also keep in mind, since it's a 68-year-old, I will also keep in mind features of microscopic colitis as a possibility, and to take biopsy and look for any features of microscopic colitis as well.
Okay. You've taken biopsies. Can you just tell us what is this?
Stool studies show. Sir, this is lipid for infiltration of the foamy lipid.
What
infiltration of the
crypt. Just tell me what it shows.
Only infiltration of the crypt. That means you've not seen a histology, is it? What are these cells? Glass-shaped cells? What are they? What are these cells? First and foremost, is it a colonic biopsy or is it a urinary biopsy? You clench your teeth like that in examination.
Madam, colonic biopsy.
So what are these cells? Okay, I think let's finish.
Yeah, we'll have to finish this. Basically,
very slow.
I wanted to ask you what your diagnosis is. Basically, there's a lot of infiltration with lymphocytes here. And that is why I wanted to ask you the diagnosis. Basically, the diagnosis was lymphocytic colitis. And, you know, what this one is a classical thing of collagenous. You find a collagen layer here. This is called collagenous colitis. Okay. Okay, right. I think we are, Dr. Rajesh,
we don't have time now. It's already 9:45.
Yeah, it's already 9:45. I think we finished 4 cases.
That's good enough. I think any final comments by the faculty?
Rajesh, your side. I've given one.
I think it is okay. I mean, there's in the learning process, but I think it is generally okay. I think the second case was a bit difficult as compared to the other three.
There's a lot of hesitancy, I think, amongst the PGs as far as DNB exam is concerned.